Our government has also started working on the development of an e-skills platform that will serve as an integrated tool for government, higher education, and the private sector to engage one another in order to match skills development programs to current skills shortages and for citizens to access career-related training and advice. And that partnership is essential. Business must know that we're working hard with the education sector to ensure that they can expand because the skills they need will be available. However, we also recognize that the most important skills interventions we can make is ensuring that every child has access to a quality basic education that will enable them to take advantage of their future opportunities. Just over 4 years ago, the Western Cape government released its strategic plan to improve education quality up to 2019. Halfway through this period as we are now, we can say that we are making good progress towards achieving our objectives, which include improving language and mathematics in our primary schools in particular as the foundation for all further schooling, improving the number and quality of passers at the National Senior Certificate, reducing the number of underperforming schools, and particularly increasing the retention rate, reducing the dropout rate at schools across the province. What we have today, Speaker, is a maturing provincial education system which has responded positively to a number of systemic improvements over the last few years. During our second term, we will continue implementing this plan and ensure greater stability in our system to maintain continuous improvement in education. The bulk of our education budget will continue to be spent on underprivileged learners, and we are investigating additional ways to provide food and other poverty alleviation measures over and above the many programs we already have in schools serving the poorest quintiles of our learners. Our key focus areas will be improving language and mathematics outcomes. That's absolutely critical. Central to this strategy will be the improvement of classroom practice, specifically the reading of more complex texts and extended writing with support from the department through the provision of additional learner support materials, curriculum advice, and additional time spent teaching. Now, Madam Speaker, I'm going to pause here to make what I think is a crucial point. I read an article in the newspaper the other day that said that once we get a fully broadband functional education system, teachers won't have to mark papers anymore because it'll all be done by computers. Now, that is not going to happen in the Western Cape, because as clever as computers can be, Madam Speaker, they do not have the capacity to mark long texts. They only have the capacity to mark multiple choice questions and answers. And the result of that kind of testing is becoming apparent through the outcomes of our education system, with children really battling to write anything longer than a couple of words and to read complex texts and analyze them. And so we will continue putting an enormous investment into the traditional methods of teaching literacy, reading complicated texts, understanding complicated texts, and writing in plain and clear language. We will also improve the quality of leadership and teaching in our schools and enhance accountability both at district levels and at schools. All schools will be required to continue setting improvement targets in each grade, especially for literacy and numeracy. These targets will be used as benchmarks for evaluating their performance, particularly in the management of schools and districts. We will also be investigating the possibility of further incentives for schools and educators based on performance. And we think that that kind of system is long overdue, because our best educators work extraordinarily hard and take enormous responsibilities and get the same remuneration as those who hardly do anything and shirk as many responsibilities as they can. And it's time to get an effective performance-related career path and pay system into our education. Then we also are going to support the strengthening of school governing bodies. School governance is becoming an increasingly complex and demanding task for a large body of volunteers. We will streamline and strengthen their training ahead of the 2015 school governing body elections to focus on leadership, management, financial management, and disciplinary processes. And if I may just add, it's also crucially important to show school governing bodies the limits of their power, because they're also accountable to the law and the Constitution, and their job is to improve education at schools, not use their power to enrich themselves or to wield power inappropriately in the school context. We will also create and welcome environments for optimal learning. We will continue to work with other government departments, most importantly the South African Police Service and civil society, to improve school safety. This year we will also expand our cooperation with the Metro Police in order to promote greater community involvement in schools. And I would like to thank the Metro Police through the Mayor for coming to our rescue in the crisis in Manenberg. It wasn't their mandate, but they came and made Manenberg safe again for our children to go to school. And it's critically important for the SAPS to take on this mandate of policing our streets. We will also improve infrastructure and facilities at schools. We will continue to build schools in areas with expanding needs and replace schools with inappropriate structures. While we have increased the school maintenance budget by more than 50% over the last 3 years, we plan to direct even more money towards maintenance in the future, which is essential to creating conducive learning environments. We will also improve access to learning support material. We will expand the use of technology inside the classroom, as well as providing additional resources that can be accessed from home. And one of the things that we often don't take into account is how difficult it is for children in disadvantaged, crime-plagued areas to have technology because of the rate of theft and crime in communities where laptops and tablets are still relatively rare. And so these are some of the major challenges we're going to have to face if we want to bridge the digital divide and enable all children to have access to technology-enhanced learning. Through the provincial government's broadband project, we will also improve the technology infrastructure at schools for teaching and learning, and I hope they won't be locked up in the computer room as soon as the lesson in ICT is over, and will be available 18 hours a day for children to actually use the computers and get onto the internet and make sure that they are using their skills to benefit their education, not simply technically learning how to use a computer, but in fact to apply that knowledge to advance their education. We will continue to conduct rigorous competency testing for our matric markers and systemic internationally benchmarked language and mathematics testing for all learners in grade 3, 6, and 9 in order to determine the level of learners' ability so that we can identify and target weaknesses and improve outcomes. We are still, Speaker, the only provincial government conducting both these kinds of tests. And the systemic testing in grade 3, 6, and 9 should not be confused with the annual national assessment tests. We do additional tests on international benchmarks because it's not good enough for South African pupils only to be able to compete with each other. We have to make sure that our children achieve international benchmarks, because what is good enough for the rest of the world is certainly good enough for South Africa. We believe that holding our schools, teachers and learners to a much higher standard is the reason why we have seen a gradual improvement in both mathematics and language outcomes at a foundation phase, and the number and quality of passes in the National Senior Certificate over the last few years, and long may it continue. Madam Speaker, meeting the health needs of an ever-expanding population with a limited budget requires innovative thinking and strong partnerships with the private sector, and our 2 doctors here today are an example of that. Our second term will be guided by the Healthcare 2030 framework, which was developed in conjunction with a range of stakeholders and strategic partners in the private sector and civil society. The framework was endorsed by Cabinet and will now be converted into key priorities that we will focus on over the next 5 years. This will include spending nearly 3.3 billion rand, Speaker, on new health facilities and upgrading existing clinics and hospitals over the next period in office. We will be replacing a number of clinics, including those in Prince Alfred Hamlet, Wolseley, Beaufort West, Sedgefield, Napier, and Villiersdorp. We will also be building new or replacing community day centres in Hermanus, George, Ravensmead, Hanover Park, District 6, Ceres, Kayamandi, and Vredenburg. There will also be upgrades to a number of hospitals across the province. Despite sustained progress, there are, Madam Speaker, a number of social challenges we face that compromise our education outcomes and that profoundly threaten the security and safety of our province and threaten job creation, particularly amongst our youth. And these problems include the increasing number of people abusing alcohol and drugs in this province. I don't know how much more one can do to educate people on the risks and dangers of dabbling with drugs and of drinking, but this problem continues to rise in this province. Secondly, the constant gang violence in hotspots and the recruitment of ever younger children into gangs. And then the trend, and it's a growing trend, unfortunately, towards unprotected sex with multiple sexual partners as well as intergenerational sex. And that is what is driving our HIV pandemic. We have the world's best treatment program in the Western Cape, the world's best and most comprehensive treatment program. But our prevention programs are failing because we are failing to curb multi-partner concurrent sexual relations and intergenerational sex. And that is something that people don't like to talk about. We're going to talk about that in the Western Cape, and we're going to be sure that we do something about it. There have to be some taboos in a society, especially when certain behavior has such profoundly negative consequences. And unprotected sex with multiple partners is not a private issue. It has massive social consequences and costs this province and our country billions of rands, and means that there is a trade-off which results in people with unavoidable injuries and illnesses not getting the treatments they deserve. And so we have to really deal with that issue. And then, as an outflow of that, the growing number of teenage pregnancies. It is a very great challenge to us, and young girls who have babies usually doom both themselves and their babies to a lifetime of poverty and disadvantage. And we have to stop that so that women get their education before they make a rational choice as to when to become a mother. And often, tragically, these girls have no choice at all in the matter. We have struggled to address these challenges during our first term in this government. This is mainly because our provincial government can't solve problems on its own. We need all government departments and institutions, civil society, communities, and particularly parents and individuals to play their part. Madam Speaker, no government can compensate for the role that responsible, committed parents must play in the lives of their children. This is the bedrock of a functional society. Studies have shown that a functional father figure often makes the difference between a child's future success or failure. It is therefore highly concerning that currently almost 60% of Western Cape children grow up with absent fathers. Far too many men, Madam Speaker, make babies and walk away from them. We want to make it much, much harder to do so. And we will continue our campaign to ensure that maintenance defaulters are blacklisted by credit bureaus. That maintenance defaulters are blacklisted by credit bureaus. Madam Speaker, our youth development strategy, launched earlier this year, focuses on interventions to provide support to young and vulnerable parents and caregivers. These include providing them with information on child development, and strengthening their capacity to care for and support their children through mentorship and training programs. One of the big problems is that a young teenager is not programmed to take on the responsibilities of being a mother because they're still focused on themselves and what they want to do with their lives. And every one of us who's ever been a mother knows that when you have a baby, it's not your life that is the focus of attention, it is your child's life and your child's opportunity. And you can only think like that when you've been through your own teenage years and been through your own stages of development. We will also continue to create safe spaces for young people where they can learn, take part in recreational activities, and be exposed to positive role models and messaging. One of our government's flagship interventions under our youth development strategy is our after-school mass participation opportunity and development program. We call it our MOD program, which started 4 years ago. There are now over 181 MOD centres based at schools across the province, which offer learners a safe, fun place to play sport, participate in cultural activities, and study after school. The Western Cape Department of Social Development also supplies meals to all learners attending these MOD centres every day. The interest shown by learners when it comes to attending their local MOD centres has been increasing, and we plan to do a lot to attract far more young people into a fun space in the afternoon, a creative space in the afternoon, rather than hanging around on street corners. An example of a really well-functioning MOD centre is at Detainen in Worcester, where nearly 200 learners attend the after-school program every day. 2 years ago, the centre started focusing on baseball while continuing to run other cultural and sporting activities. 2 of the members of the Detainen baseball team have now been selected to represent Boerland in the Provincial Baseball League. And if it hadn't been for the MOD Centre, they would probably never have held a baseball bat in their hands. And now they have got something constructive to do, and they feel affirmed and part of a provincial team. And Leyden Andrews was recently selected to play in the South African under-15 team that will be participating in the under-15 Baseball World Cup. Now, we are thrilled by that because we believe that if you want to transform sport and ensure sport development, you start at the grassroots, spotting young talent at schools, and that is what we want our MOD centres to play a part in. So that is what we mean by expanding opportunities so that our young people can use them. And even those who never make a local or national team will still have the fun and the adrenaline and the team spirit of playing together with their peers in constructive activities after school. There's also a close relationship between learners and coaches at the Detainen Centre. Coaches are regarded as mentors by learners and are often asked for advice on a wide range of social issues. And I think it's very important to understand that when young people are teenagers, they need to cut the umbilical cord with their parents, and they need other parental role models to relate to and to speak to outside of their families. And the big attraction of gangs, I believe, is that that need is supplied by belonging to a gang. And of course, if you can belong to something more constructive and have affirmation through that, that will change many, many young people's attraction for gangs. And this is the role that the mentors and coaches are increasingly playing. Our aim is to replicate the successes of Detainen at all our other MOD centres in the province, and many of them are working as well, so that as many young people as possible are kept off our streets and away from drugs, alcohol, and gangs, so they don't have to get their affirmation and sense of belonging through substance abuse. We will also be using the MOD program to launch an exciting new initiative called our Youth Gap Year. And this will be a volunteer program which will start at the beginning of next year. We've noticed that many, many young people come from overseas wanting to volunteer in South Africa for a gap year. There are many South African youngsters who want to take a gap year. And we're saying, why don't we coordinate those activities and make the MOD Centre programs in the afternoon available as sites for people to spend their gap years constructively, tutoring pupils with their homework in subjects with which they may be familiar, teaching music, starting sport and coaching sports, and doing all of the other things that children in many advantaged schools can take for granted because their teachers are prepared to stay on throughout the afternoon and offer these programs which is tragically not the case in many of our schools serving disadvantaged communities. So during the second half of this year, we will be inviting qualifying school leavers, and it's going to be a hard program to get onto because you have to really be able to add value in the mod centres. So we'll be inviting qualifying school leavers and university graduates to apply. We aim to sign up in the first year 120 volunteers for our mod centres who will begin tutoring at the beginning of the 2015 school year. We plan to expand the program to 300 tutors in the medium term. Another example of a safe space created by our government is the highly successful Youth Cafe in Rocklands, which was opened by the Western Cape Department of Social Development in January, and where young people can participate in a range of entrepreneurial skills development programs.